the 99% chance right now that there'll be another quarter point cut later this month. And right now, that seems to be what the market cares about.
Yeah, look, I think there's so much other good news going on. And, one of the biggest threats to our economy over the last 4 or 5 years in the market has been inflation. This inflation is driven by government spending. So if you shut down the government, in a lot of cases, to me, it's a net positive because there's less spending. So I think there's so many good things going on beneath the surface of the market in terms of we just passed fiscal stimulus, we're getting monetary stimulus, earnings estimates are too low, there's artificial intelligence. And oh yeah, by the way, in the history of shutdowns, on average, 54% of the time markets are up during the shutdown. 86% of the time, 1 year later, markets are up. So look, I don't think this is a big deal. I think it's something the market's going to take in stride, whether we're shut down for a week or a month or whatever.
And I think Doge was a good experiment. Those government cuts were actually hailed by is just looking at this market. Obviously, Liberation Day was an aberration. That was a big announcement. It spooked the markets. They dropped. They've come back and then some since then as policy has been adjusted. But this is an administration that's had an interesting go of things in its second round with the Biden break, if you will, in between. This is a chance to do things over. The market seems to be a little bit more familiar, a little bit more comfortable with Trump's way of doing things. And he's changed since the attempt on his life and how he looks at it, who he's surrounded himself with. It all just feels a lot calmer this time.
Yeah, look, well, I think you have like the leftist hysteria, which will exist no matter who's president, no matter what's going on, right? It's like the kid that's always crying nonstop or the girlfriend that's always leaving with your credit card and coming back a day later, right? Like that's not going to stop, but the precision with which they're executing this agenda in this administration is exponentially greater than it was in the first administration. And Brian was talking about Russ Voigt. I read, and like, I don't know if it's verified, if there's a 61-day shutdown, President Trump can fire 750,000 government employees. You just had 100,000 file for early retirement because they'll get the payout.
Right, they chose that.
Look, when you're a company that's bleeding cash, you need to cut overhead.
Right.
And so I think some people out there like to celebrate when government employees get fired. I don't. But look, like we're bleeding money. Like you can't sustain a $2 trillion deficit. We could sustain a $1 trillion deficit, right, which is astronomical, but the numbers are too big now, and you need to cut the number of employees, you need to cut the spending outlays, and you need to find ways to increase revenue. We're getting some more revenue from tariffs, and we did see a lot of carnage in the the tariff tantrum, as I like to refer to it, from Liberation Day. Yeah. But the willingness of the Trump administration to take that beating up front, keep a cool hand, they won. They said, you throw at me whatever you want, we're going to stand pat. And they ended up winning in basically every single one of these trade deals. We'll see what goes on with the Supreme Court if this victory gets undone. But it's almost as if this was extremely beneficial to have 4 years and have people like the architects of Project 2025 sitting as the head of OMB.
Yeah,
I wouldn't buy long tariff revenue.
It's like Oprah with the tariff revenue.
Yeah, that was my point in saying that.
Well,
but look, and you're right about the long end of the curve, because I'm not worried about inflation going forward. Like the difference between your 2s and your 30s should be the market's estimation of growth plus inflation over the next 7 years. If this 3% growth, 3% plus growth, which you saw last quarter, Atlanta Fed GDP now is saying 3.8% this quarter. We're annualizing that in this quarter. If we're staying above 3%, that spread's going to permanently widen. So the Fed could cut another 100 basis points, and we could have a 5-year 30-year Treasury, right? So I don't know.
5% 30-year.
5% on the 30-year Treasury, because that curve's going to steepen, which will be great for banks, which in turn could lower mortgage rates, because now you still have an excess spread where you have historically 175 basis points between a 10-year Treasury and a 30-year mortgage. Okay, that's been as high as 300 since the failure of Silicon Valley Bank. Okay, there is not enough shelf space for mortgages on banks right now, and so as the front end comes down and higher rates go up, it's going to create a lot more shelf space for them, so the 10-year Treasury could stay flat and mortgage rates could come down 50 or 100 basis points, which would be great for everybody.
What's helping the stock market is a Fed that is letting inflation run at
robot wars. We were talking about Tesla just a little bit earlier with respect to autonomous driving vehicles and what Elon Musk is trying to do. Meta's trying to get in this race also in different ways, but The question is, who's going to be more successful? Who's going to do it first? And who's going to do it en masse?
Yeah, so it's going to be Tesla without a doubt, and it's not even going to be a competition. Elon has said time and again that the real product of Tesla is the production. Is their production line, their ability to mass produce things cheaply and effectively. And so if you look at the bulk of EVs that are out on the road, the automakers are losing money with every single one of them sold, where Elon's had years where he's at 30 or 40% gross margins compared to companies that are losing 20 or 30 or 40 grand per car they sell. So how is Facebook going to get into this production business? If I'm Mark Zuckerberg, I go ahead with all these glasses and I sell that data to Elon or a competitor or whoever else. I think he's smart in trying to chase this super intelligence. That sort of super intelligence fairy, if you will. But Tesla, and it's reflected somewhat in the stock price, although I would say not completely, that they're going to dominate this robots. These robots are going to be like 40 grand. You're going to be able to lease them for $300 or $400 a month. And if you have a huge warehouse like my cousin's business in the Midwest, like he's going to get a half a dozen of them to work 24/7 with all the other employees there to work on the simpler tasks.
Or even if you're a mom, like I'm looking at this robot, I'm looking at this video, I'm like, oh, they can cook, they can do laundry.